brain is made up of nervous tissue. Now the nervous tissue comprises of neuronal tissue. Specialized connective tissue and ordinary connective tissue. Neuronal tissue proper, it comprises of cells known as nerve cells or neurons. Then there are specialized connective tissue. These are also in the form of cells known as glial cells. And then ordinary connective tissue composing of fibroblasts, histiocytes, fat cells, collagen fibers, elastic fibers. And these ordinary connective tissue is in the form of meninges. That is pia, mater, arachnoid mater, and dura mater. Made up of general type of connective tissue. But the nervous tissue proper has special type of connective tissue, and that special type of connective tissue do not have connective tissue fibers. It is again in the form of cells only. And the cells are collectively known as the glial cells. And these glial cells provide physical and nutritional support to the neurons or nerve cells. Neurons, what are neurons? Neurons are cells with processes. And neuron is a structural unit. Neuron is the structural unit of central nervous system. Now, what is the physiological or functional unit of nervous system? Now, neurons are cells having a cell body and processes. This is a neuron, which is the structural unit of the nervous system. Now, physiological unit is the chain of neuron. Now you can see in this figure, I have shown 3 neurons. They make junction with each other known as synapses. It is a synapse. and it is also a synapse. So what is neuron? These are nerve cells having cell body with processes. This is a neuron, which is structural unit of nervous system, and chain of neurons which make synapses with one another is the physiological or functional unit of nervous system. Now briefly, what is the structure of a neuron? Or nerve cell. It is a cell with processes comprising of cell body and processes. The cell body is also known as perikaryon. And the processes are also known as neuroids. These are the parts of neuron. Each neuron has a cell body called perikaryon and processes called neuroids. It is like other cell having cell membrane, cytoplasm, nucleus inside, various cell organelles, etc. Now, as I told you, the neuron has a cell body. Outside is cytoplasm, outside is cell membrane, then inside is cytoplasm and cell organelles. Now this is structure of a neuron. Now here in the center is cell body of neuron, also known as perikaryon. Peri means around. Karyon means nucleus. This is cell body, outside is the cell membrane, then embedded in the cytoplasm is nucleus. Here is cytoplasm. There are cell organoids as usual in other cells, but there are special cell organoids in the cell body of the neuron. What are special organoids in neurons? Number one, nasal substance. And number two, neurofilaments. So apart from usual cell organelles like endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, filaments, etc., there are special type of organelles found in the neurons, not found in other body cells. That is nasal substance and neurofilaments. Nasal substance is an aggregation of rough endoplasmic reticulum. Aggregation of rough endoplasmic reticulum is known as nasal substance. Now, nasal substance is present in the proximal part of the cell body of a neuron, absent in the distal part. Suspended in the cytoplasm around the nucleus of the cell body of the neuron, there are aggregations of rough endoplasmic reticulum known as the nasal substance or nasal bodies. And you can see these are present only in the proximal part of the cell body of the neuron. Now here you can see the axon starts. So the distal part of the body of the neuron, from where the axon starts, this part is not having nasal substance. This portion of the cell body of the neuron is known as the axon hillock. This part of the cell body of the neuron, which is devoid of nasal substance, has a special name known as the axon hillock. Axon hillock is not part of the axon, it is part of the cell body of the neuron. Difference is that in the proximal part of the cell body there is nasal substance, but in the region of cell body close to the beginning of the axon is devoid of nasal substance and is known as the axon hillock. This part of the cell body is the generator of the neuron. It is considered as generator of neuron. Why? Action potential starts here. The axon hillock part of the cell body of the neuron is considered as generator of the neuron because action potential is generated here. Rest of the cell body of the neuron, which is occupied by nasal substance, is the nourishment center of the neuron. This part of the proximal part of the cell body neuron is considered as nourishment center of the neuron. It is occupied by nasal substance. Why? All the nutrients are synthesized here. Then from this region they are supplied to the processes of the neuron. So the processes of the neurons, they receive nutrition from this part of the cell body. Suppose if we cut the neuron here or it is damaged by some trauma, this proximal stem of the neuron, of the axon, nerve fiber, will receive nutrition and it will remain alive. But this distal segment of the neuron, which is cut, is devoid of nutrition from the nourishment center of the cell body. Therefore, this part of the axon will die because of lack of nourishment. So the cell processes of the neurons, they receive nutrition from the cell body, this proximal part in which there is a nasal substance. So this was about the cell body of the neuron. Then processes collectively known as the neurites. These are dendrites and axon. Dendrites and axon. Axon is also known as nerve fiber. There is a difference between nerve fiber and peripheral nerve. This single process, axon, is known as nerve fiber. And the peripheral nerve comprises of several nerve fibers, several axons. So the axon or nerve fiber do not stand for one peripheral nerve. No. This process of the neuron is called axon or nerve fiber. And a peripheral nerve comprises of bundles of axons or nerve fibers. So the dendrite and axon collectively known as the neurites. What is difference between dendrites and axon? You can see here. Dendrites are several branching and they are shorter as compared to the neuron, as compared to the axon, sorry. Dendrites are several, they are branching and they are shorter. If you compare with the axon, axons are single. From each neuron, one axon arises. And number two, longer, not branching. In a tree-like fashion. You can see the dendrites, they branch and rebranch in a tree-like fashion. The dendrite is derived from the word dendron, which means tree. Because the dendrites, they branch and rebranch in a tree-like fashion. This is why they are called dendrites. And dendrite is derived from the Greek word dendron, which means tree-like. So dendrites are several, branching, shorter. Axon is one, it is longer. There are no branches, but terminally it branches, having synaptic vesicles. Even some neurons, they are 5 feet long. So length of the neurons vary. So this is structure about the neuron. Detailed structure of the cell body, dendrites, and axon you will study in histology. So this is the structural unit of the nervous system, known as the neuron. Now these neurons, neurons are supported by special type of connective tissue cells known as the glial cells. These glial cells provide physical and nutritional support to the neurons. Now, because we have central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, therefore we group all these glial cells into number 1, central glial cells. And peripheral glial cells. Those glial cells which are in the central nervous system, that is brain and spinal cord, are grouped as central glial cells. And those glial cells which are in the peripheral nervous system, with the peripheral nerves, they are grouped as peripheral glial cells. What are these central glial cells? These are number 1, oligodendrocytes. Astrocytes. Microglia. Ependymal cells. These are central glial cells. Glial cells located in the gray and white matter of cerebrum, cerebellum, brainstem, etc., and spinal cord, central system. And there are glial cells which are associated with peripheral nerves, with ganglia. They are grouped as peripheral glial cells. Now, what are peripheral glial cells? Schwann cell and satellite cells. One of the central glial cell, oligodendrocyte, just we discussed with the cerebellum. I told you the cerebellum and cerebrum, the white matter of the cerebellum and cerebrum comprise of axons or nerve fibers which are myelinated, and that myelin is produced by oligodendrocytes. There are some peripheral nerves which are also myelinated. So the peripheral myelination is carried out by Schwann cells. So oligodendrocytes are meant for central myelination. And the Schwann cells are meant for peripheral myelination. Of nerve fibers. These are the special type of supporting cells, collectively known as the glial cells, which we divide according to their location. In the central nervous system, these are grouped as central glial cells, and in the peripheral nervous system, these are grouped as peripheral glial cells. You will study these cells in detail in the histology. Now, we will discuss the types of neurons. Number 1, based on number of poles. What is the pole? I told you a neuron comprised of cell body and neurites, which are dendrites and an axon. Now the point from which a process arises is known as pole. This is a cell body and these are dendrites and this is axon. Now the point of the cell body from which a process originates is known as the pole. So based on the number of poles, we classify the neurons into different types. Number one is multipolar. Multipolar neurons. For example, here you can see an example of multipolar neuron, a cell body having several dendrites in one axon, and the point of the cell body of the neuron from which a process arises is called pole. So because there are several neurites, several branches, therefore there are multiple poles. So such type of neurons, they are known as the multipolar neurons. These are found in the cerebral cortex. Gray matter of the cerebrum, cerebellar cortex. The multipolar neuron are found in the gray matter of the cerebrum, gray matter of the cerebellum, cerebellar cortex, and in the anterior horn of spinal cord. These are some of the sites where you can see the multipolar neuron. Second variety is bipolar neurons. A neuron from which two processes arise. For example, this is cell body of a neuron, and this is dendrite, and this is axon. Now here in this case, you can see there are 2 points or 2 poles from which 2 processes arise. Cell body, this is dendrite and this is axon. Such neurons are known as the bipolar neurons. For example, olfactory neurons. Neurons of the cortex of olfactory and the bipolar neurons of retina. Retina of the eyeball. Bipolar neurons having only 2 processes, one dendrite, one axon. So there are 2 poles. Such neurons are known as the bipolar neurons. They are found in the olfactory system, the portion of the brain for sense of smell. So olfactory neurons are example of bipolar neuron, and bipolar neurons are the retina of the eyeball. Next, unipolar. Neurons. Only one process arises. For example, this is cell body And from the cell body, one process arises, which then divide into two processes. Unipolar. You can see from the cell body there is only one point from which a process arises, a common stem arises, which after short distance it bifurcates into a peripheral process and central process. Such type of neurons are known as the unipolar neurons. These neurons are also known as pseudo-unipolar. Unipolar or pseudo-unipolar. Why pseudo-unipolar? Developmentally, these neurons have cell body and two processes. They are bipolar. Now, as the development proceeds, these two processes try to approximate. This is cell body, and you can see these two processes. They approximate. This process continues till these two processes meet and form one common stem, which then bifurcate into central process and peripheral process. These are the steps in the development of these unipolar or pseudo-unipolar neurons. Initially, these are not unipolar. These are bipolar, cell body with two processes, so thus having two poles. Then as the development processes, the two processes, they try to approximate. Ultimately, these two processes, they meet as a short stem. And after a short distance, the two parts remain separated. One becomes central process, the other becomes peripheral process. In this way, when the development is completed, they appear as unipolar. So because actually these are bipolar, this is why they are also known as pseudo-unipolar. Pseudo means false, not true. Pseudo-unipolar. Unipolar or pseudo-unipolar neurons. These unipolar neurons, they are found in the spinal ganglia. Last time we discussed that the dorsal root of the spinal nerve is characterized by presence of a ganglion known as the spinal ganglion, and also sensory ganglia. Spinal ganglia, number 2, sensory ganglia of 5th, 7th, 9th, and 10th cranial nerves. This diagram just shows the development process. Ultimately, this is the actual structure of the unipolar or pseudo-unipolar neuron. These are found in spinal ganglia, the ganglia which are associated with spinal nerve, dorsal root of the spinal nerve. Then sensory ganglion of 5th cranial nerve, 7th cranial nerve, 9th cranial nerve, 10th cranial nerve. These ganglia have unipolar type of neurons or pseudo-unipolar. Next is N-axonic neurons. Number 4. axonic neurons. That is the neurons which do not have axons. So next, fourth variety are anaxonic neurons. That is neurons having no axons, only dendrite. Only dendrites are present. Axon is absent, but dendrites are present. Such type of neurons are known as the anaxonic neuron. Example is amacrine cells of retina. Amacrine cells of the retina are example of anaxonic neurons. Then apolar neurons. Number 5. That is neuron without processes, without poles. Without dendrite and axon. That is having no poles. Just there is cell body. Neurons which have no poles, in other words, which do not have any cell process, no dendrite, no axon, only cell body is there. These are called apolar neurons. These are found in the adrenal medulla, adrenal gland. You know, adrenal gland or suprarenal gland is endocrine gland. Inside is the adrenal medulla, outside is the adrenal cortex. Now, adrenal medulla has modified neurons. That is, the neurons having only cell body, no dendrites, no axon. Such type of neurons are known as the apolar neurons. So, based on presence or absence or number of poles or processes, we classify the neurons into multipolar, bipolar, unipolar or pseudo-unipolar, anaxonic, and apolar neurons. Now, based on function, we again classify the neurons into various types. Based on function, again we divide the neurons into various types. For example, number 1, sensory neurons. Number 2, motor neurons. Number 3, internuncial neurons. And number 4, autonomic neurons. Based on function, and their name indicate sensory neuron, motor neurons, internuncial neurons, autonomic neurons. For example, I will give an example of spinal cord. A section through spinal cord. Gray matter inside, having anterior horn, posterior horn. Then we know the origin of spinal nerve from the anterolateral sulcus. Ventral root arises from the dorsolateral sulcus. Dorsal root arises. The ventral and dorsal root join together to form spinal nerve. Dorsal root is characterized by presence of an oval swelling known as the spinal ganglion. Now spinal nerve here in the ganglion, spinal ganglion, there are several neurons. I will draw only one neuron. Unipolar neuron, as I described just now, neuron having one process, one pole. Spinal ganglion. There are several such neurons here. I have drawn only one. A unipolar neuron having a common stem which bifurcate into a peripheral process and central process. The peripheral passes through the dorsal root of the spinal nerve and spinal nerve. The central passes through the dorsal root and enter into the posterior horn of the spinal cord. Then in the anterior horn, again there are neurons having dendrites, multipolar neurons, dendrites, cell body, and axon. There are several such neurons, but I have drawn only one neuron. This is anterior horn of gray matter of the spinal cord. So, from the periphery, sensations, touch, pain, temperature, etc., they are carried through processes of the neurons of the spinal ganglia to spinal nerve, passes through the dorsal root, from the ganglion and dorsal root enter into the posterior horn of the spinal cord. In this way, the sensation reach the spinal cord. Then the body perform motor activity, muscles contract, the limbs, etc., they move. So these impulses are carried by these neurons which pass through the ventral root. The axons of these neurons pass to the ventral root, spinal nerve, and then supply the muscles, etc. So what is this neuron? Which type of neurons are these? Which carry sensations from periphery towards the spinal cord, towards the brainstem, and then to the sensory cortex. So these are sensory neurons. Then which type of neurons are these which carry sensation from the spinal cord, from medulla oblongata, midbrain, pons, I mean to say from brainstem, from cerebrum. These impulses pass through the ventral root of the spinal nerve or cranial nerve, pass through the spinal nerve and supply the muscles. The muscles contract, the glands secrete in response. Such type of neurons are motor neurons. So I told you based on function, we have sensory neurons. I have given one example. This section belongs to spinal cord. This may be medulla oblongata, pons, midbrain, and then motor neuron. So sensory and motor neuron. Now, between sensory neuron and motor neuron in the center, there may be one or more neurons also. For example, here, this is a neuron. Then another neuron. So can you see? Between sensory neuron and motor neuron, there may be one or more neurons interconnecting the sensory and motor neurons. Such type of neurons are known as the internuncial neurons. For example, in this diagram, I have shown two neurons, one green color, one red. Internuncial are simply interneurons. So, based on function, those neurons which can carry sensation from periphery toward the central nervous system, that is brain and brainstem, I have drawn only spinal cord, are grouped as sensory neurons. Those neurons which carry sensation from brain, the brainstem and spinal cord towards the periphery and supply the muscle which contract, glands which secrete, such type of neurons are known as the motor neurons. And there are neurons which intervene between sensory and motor neurons. These are called internuncial neurons or interneurons. These vary from one to several. In this diagram, I have drawn only two neurons, green and red, between sensory and motor. These are called internuncial neurons. These are the most numerous neurons in the nervous system. That is 99.9% are internuncial neurons. As compared to all the neurons, it is these internuncial neurons which are most numerous. 99.9% are internuncial neurons. The other are motor, sensory, multipolar, bipolar, etc. Then autonomic neurons, their name indicates autonomic nervous system, and they are divided into sympathetic neurons and parasympathetic neurons. As we divide the autonomic nervous system into sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic, they are composing of neurons. Therefore, the neurons are also divided into sympathetic neurons of sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic neurons of parasympathetic nervous system. So, based on number of poles, we classify the neurons into various types. Based on function or physiology, we divided the neurons in these three types. Now, third, based on length of the axon. What are the types of neurons based on length of axon? Not length of whole neuron, only axon. We have two types. Golgi type 1. Golgi type 1 neurons and Golgi type 2 neurons. So based on length of the axon, Golgi type 1 neurons are very long. Golgi type 1s are having very long axons. These axons, I told you that in the cerebral cortex there are dendrites, nerve cell bodies and initial parts of the axons. From the gray matter, these neurons pass through the white matter and then leave the white matter in the form of peripheral nerves like sciatic nerve, radial nerve, ulnar nerve, cranial nerves. So these neurons which are Golgi type 1, these are very long and their axons, they pass through the white matter, they leave the gray matter, pass through the white matter to different parts of the brain and even leave the brain in the spinal cord as peripheral nerve and supply the periphery. Such type of neurons are Golgi type 1 neurons. And the second type of neuron are Golgi type 2 neurons. They have very short axons. The axons of Golgi type 2 neurons, they are confined to the gray matter. These axons do not leave the gray matter, do not pass through the white matter, and do not run in the peripheral nerves. They are limited to the gray matter. So, based on length of the axon, we divide the neurons into types: Golgi type 1 neuron and Golgi type 2 neuron. Golgi type 1 neuron has very long axons. Their axons leave the gray matter and run through the white matter in the form of various tracts to various parts of the brain, and even leave the brain and spinal cord in the form of cranial nerves and peripheral nerves. While the Golgi type 2 neurons have very short axons, they are limited to the gray matter. Their axons do not leave the gray matter and do not run in the white matter and outside the brain. So these were types of neurons based on pools, based on function, based on length of the axon, etc. Now I told you that the neurons are the cells having cytoplasm, nucleus. Most of these cell organelles are there, and even some special organelles like initial substance and neurofilaments are present. But the mature neurons do not have centrioles. Those neurons which are mature, they do not have centrioles. And you know the function of centriole. Centriole play a very important role in cell division. One cell divided into 2, 2 into 4, 4 into 8, and so on. So when a cell is damaged, it may be replaced by division of the surrounding cells, and in this way the damaged cells are replaced. But in case of neurons, that is mature neurons, the mature neurons do not divide. Mature neurons do not divide. Why? Because mature neurons, they do not have centrioles. The centrioles disappear. So mature neurons do not have neurons. Therefore, mature neurons do not divide to replace the damaged neurons. The neurons which are damaged by trauma or by some disease, they cannot be replaced by division of the mature neurons. Once they die, they dies. No replacement. But the damaged nervous tissue is replaced by fibrosis, known as sclerosis. The damaged tissue in the brain is replaced by fibrous tissue, known as the sclerosis. So they are not replaced by neurons. Why? Because mature neuron, the centrioles disappear and they lose the ability to divide. Therefore, they do not replace. Immature neurons have centrioles. They can divide. So in the earlier stages, the immature neuron, they have centrioles. Therefore, the immature neuron can divide and can replace the damaged neurons. But once those immature neurons become mature, their centriole disappear, then they lose the ability to divide. Therefore, repair of the damaged nervous tissue do not occur by nervous tissue in adults, in mature brain, because of absence of centrioles. But there is only one exception. Except olfactory neurons. The neurons in the olfactory mucosa of the nose, meant for sense of smell. These mature olfactory neurons, they contain centrioles. They have the ability to divide and replace. The olfactory neurons has a lifespan. And olfactory neuron do not remain alive for more than 2 months. During and after 2 months, the mature olfactory neuron is damaged. It dies. It is replaced by existing mature olfactory neurons. Why? Because the mature olfactory neurons are the only mature neurons which retain centrioles. They can divide and replace the dead olfactory neurons. Thank you very much.